I'm going to keep this review relatively short because so many creators have been able to go into more depth than I can. In all honesty, I just wanted to cover my general thoughts and experiences with the open beta for Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, which is one of my most anticipated games this year. Let's start with the good, then waffle on about the bad. There really was a lot to like about the open beta. Also, it seems there's a possibility we're going to have a second open beta to fix some of the issues SNK are now aware of. More time with the game is just a good thing. Since we're discussing the good, here's what I really enjoyed. I really liked the amount of characters SNK gave us to play with during the open beta. We had 8 characters to choose from, and it just confirmed who my mains are going to be, at least to some extent. Going into this game, I knew B. Jenny was going to be one of my mains, not only because I love how she looks, but I loved how she played in Garou Mark of the Wolves, which, by the way, I have a review for on this channel, so maybe check that out after you've watched this one. But I also discovered I really loved one of the newcomers. It's Preacha, for those wondering. She hits like a truck, she's fairly fast, and she has decent mix-up potential. All things I enjoy in my fighting game characters. I was also a little surprised Mai Shiranui wound up being one of the characters I gravitated towards. For whatever reason, she's just a lot of fun to play in this game, where I found her a little on the boring side when playing the King of Fighters, where I've got most of my SNK fighting game experience. I also found the game far more enjoyable than the title it's directly competing with, that being Street Fighter VI, a game which thoroughly disappointed me as I just didn't like how the game felt. But anyways, the beta gave us 8 characters to play with, which is a ton when you consider the base roster will feature 17 characters, expanding to a total of 22 once the first season is complete. Also, everyone who buys the game gets access to the first season, which is just a nice thing as it ultimately makes the game less expensive if you're seriously into it. But back to the beta for a bit. Other things I liked about the beta include how easy it is to get into a match. I was playing on PS5, and the longest I had to wait to find an opponent was around 5 minutes. And that was during dinner time on the East Coast, so not exactly a time I'd consider conducive to finding a match. The netcode is also super robust. I had a match that would have been outright unplayable on delay-based netcode. In this situation, rollback made the match possible. While not an enjoyable experience during that super laggy match, I could at least get an idea for what my opponent was doing, even if the rollback frames made the game feel a little on the jittery side. I wasn't able to test out the lobby system during my time with the beta, but I imagine it's at least a passable experience. The gameplay is also incredibly solid and fun. I covered in a previous video why it being a technical fighter was going to be a good thing for the FGC. If you're interested, a card will be on screen now, and a link will be in the description. Before I get to the bad, I'd like to discuss some random thoughts I had on the experience. I noticed some characters felt more intuitive on either arcade stick or with my Hori fighting Commander Octa, which are my go-to controllers when it comes to 2D fighters. In this instance, Mai and B Jenny felt far better on those options than they did on a DualSense. Preacha, on the other hand, felt far more natural on the DualSense. Now keep in mind, this is a rather subjective thing, so your mileage may vary. I also found Character Select to be a little bit on the clunky side, but not something I'd outright put in the negative. It's just how SNK likes you to pre-register what character you're going to use. It's a perfectly serviceable design choice, but I'll admit I do prefer how Dead or Alive and Tekken handle the matter, as it's just more satisfying to scroll through the characters and change on the fly. So, for this next part, I'm going to be a bit negative and point out where SNK can and should improve the game before and after launch, along with things that just aren't to my taste. Let's start off with the menus. This is by no means a deal breaker, and it serves its purpose, navigating you around the game in between fights. I find the mostly yellow background with very little contrast a little hard on the eyes for extended periods of time. Couple that with the text not having the highest amount of contrast, and it can sometimes be a little hard for me, at least to know exactly which option I'm selecting. I know this is partially thanks to my astigmatism. I can get by, but it does hamper the experience from being as nice as it should be. Also, if I'm honest, the simplicity used for the King of Fighters 15 or Mark of the Wolves are just things I like better. Again, this negative is more subjective, so again, your mileage may vary here. My main issue with the game is having matches just randomly drop mid-set. It happened infrequently, which is a good thing, but being booted back to the title screen was a little frustrating. I noticed this mainly during crossplay matches, and if your opponent backed out of the match after you had clicked to rematch. Not the end of the world, but something I would like to see ironed out. But it probably will be, even if SNK games tend to not launch in the best states. This is one they should be able to fix with some ease. Another thing I wasn't really a big fan of was how the rank system worked for this game. SNK have opted for a really antiquated system where your rank is tied to all of your characters. This is just something most modern fighting games have changed by having your rank tied to an individual one. Again, this isn't a deal breaker, and it's more of a nitpick on my part. Ideally, I'd like to see SNK change this, as it'd just encourage players to try out more characters, as they'd not become discouraged when ranking down while trying out new characters. I also wish we could sit in training mode during the matchmaking process, but I can understand why SNK opted not to for the open beta at least, since they don't want people cracking the game akin to what happened to Tekken 8, so I wouldn't be surprised if we're ultimately able to get in the lab between matches for the full release. If you've made it this far into the video, why not consider subscribing? Also, if you played any of the open beta, what did you think of it? Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell, Danny Boy, and Doug S. If you want to support this channel further, you can do so by hitting the join button or the link in the description. Now check out one of my previous Fatal Fury videos, or check out my review for Garou Mark of the Wolves, and until next time, keep blazing that trail.